The sound of keys clanged against metal as the guard's voice echoed through the long, dim corridor. "Inmate down. Call medical, now." The chaos that followed would be the moment that pushed Rikers Island straight into the headlines. Cameras, reporters, and city officials would soon be flooding the gates of America's most infamous jail. But inside those cold walls, it was already too late for one man. The prisoner, Jamal Torres, had been locked in solitary for weeks. When officers opened his cell, they found him lifeless on the floor, bruised and dehydrated. Word spread fast. Another inmate had died under mysterious conditions. It wasn't the first time. But this time, the truth couldn't be buried. Within hours, photos leaked online. News outlets screamed the same question: what's really happening inside Rikers Island? That night, the mayor's office promised a full investigation. But the people who lived inside those walls, the inmates and even some guards, already knew what was coming. Rikers Island was about to face the storm it had long avoided. The story of Rikers scandals didn't start with Jamal. It started decades earlier, hidden behind layers of silence, fear, and corruption. Inmates whispered about the program, an unspoken rule that allowed guards to punish those who spoke up. Some said if you complained about mistreatment, you'd be sent to the box, where the lights never went off and the screams never stopped. Rikers was supposed to be a jail for people awaiting trial or serving short sentences, but it had turned into a nightmare city. The overcrowded cells were packed with hundreds beyond capacity. Rats and roaches crawled across the floors. Food often came cold or spoiled. But what really made the place dangerous wasn't just the dirt, it was the power struggle inside. Guards against inmates. Inmates against each other. Everyone trying to survive another day. There were stories that never made the news. Like the teenage boy beaten so badly he couldn't recognize himself in the mirror. Or the female officer who tried to report abuse and found her locker smashed the next morning. The violence wasn't just between prisoners, it was in the system itself. But when Jamal's death hit social media, everything changed. Protesters marched outside City Hall. Families of former inmates held up pictures of their loved ones. "Shut Rikers down," they shouted. And for once, people started listening. Inside the jail, things were tense. Officers moved cautiously, knowing every move could now end up on camera. Inmates whispered about investigators walking through the halls, asking questions. But they also knew what happened to those who talked. Fear spread faster than the truth. One night, a young corrections officer named Daniel Rivera stayed after his shift, staring at the reports piling on his desk. He'd seen things he couldn't forget: brutality, neglect, and cover-ups. He thought about Jamal and how his own brother had once sat in a cell on this island. Rivera wanted to tell the truth, but doing that meant risking everything. His job, his safety, his life. He finally picked up his phone and sent an anonymous email to a journalist known for exposing corruption in New York prisons. The message was short: "If you want proof of what's really happening at Rikers, meet me tomorrow night. Don't tell anyone." The next day, as the sun set behind the New York skyline, Rivera waited nervously at a small diner across from the East River. Every time the door opened, he looked up. He knew that if anyone from the department saw him here, he could be finished. Minutes turned into an hour, and just when he started to lose hope, a woman walked in, dark jacket, notepad in hand. She gave him a small nod and sat across from him. Rivera took a deep breath. "You want to know why Rikers made headlines?" he said quietly. "Because the things that happen in there would break your soul if you saw them yourself." He slid a flash drive across the table. The journalist hesitated before taking it. "What's on this?" she asked. Rivera looked around, his voice barely a whisper. "Videos. Real ones. From the inside. And once you see them, you'll understand why this place can't be saved." The woman's hand froze halfway. Rivera stood to leave, his heart pounding as he whispered, "Just be ready. Once this comes out, everything changes." He stepped out of the diner, disappearing into the night. The journalist plugged the flash drive into her laptop. What she saw made her gasp and cover her mouth. Her eyes widened as the footage rolled, grainy clips of abuse, neglect, and suffering too real to ignore. Then came the final clip: one that would make the world stop and stare. The next morning, New York City woke up to chaos. News channels flashed the same headline across every screen: leaked videos expose Rikers Island scandal. The footage Rivera had shared was everywhere: guards roughing up inmates, officers laughing as prisoners begged for help, and overcrowded cells that looked more like cages than rooms. One video showed Jamal Torres hours before his death, calling out for water as guards ignored him. The city was furious. Protesters filled the streets again, louder than ever. "Justice for Jamal" echoed through Manhattan. Reporters camped outside Rikers' main gate, their cameras pointed toward the crumbling concrete walls. Inside, the staff were panicking. The warden ordered emergency meetings. Every officer was told to stay quiet, every file locked up tight. But it was already too late. The truth was out. Rivera didn't go to work that day. He turned off his phone and hid out at his cousin's apartment in Queens. He knew the department would trace the leak back to him. His hands shook as he watched the TV. The same journalist he'd met at the diner was now on screen, her voice steady as she revealed what the flash drive contained. "Months of hidden abuse," she said, "and a system that looked away." Meanwhile, inside Rikers, inmates banged on their cell doors, cheering when they heard the news. "We told them," one shouted. "Now they can't deny it no more." But for the officers walking the halls, fear was everywhere. Some felt angry, others ashamed. The island was collapsing from the inside out. By noon, the mayor called an emergency press conference. Cameras clicked as he took the podium. "We are launching a full investigation," he announced. "Rikers Island has failed in its duty to protect those in its care. This ends now." The promise sounded powerful, but to those who'd been there, it was just words. Over the next few days, more stories came out. A whistleblower claimed that officers falsified reports to hide inmate injuries. A nurse admitted that medical requests were often ignored for days. Then came the biggest bombshell, an internal memo showing that top officials knew about these problems years ago and did nothing. The public outrage grew unbearable. Late-night talk shows mocked the city's excuses. Celebrities spoke out on social media. Even former inmates began sharing their stories online, their videos going viral. "Rikers broke me," one man said tearfully, "but now the world will finally know what they did." While the city burned with anger, Rivera's fear turned into guilt. He hadn't expected things to explode like this. He just wanted the truth out, but now he worried about the people still inside. He turned to the TV again and saw a headline that made his stomach drop: "Corrections officer suspected of leaking videos missing." That was him. They were looking for him now. He quickly packed a small bag, ready to leave town. But before he could step out, his cousin stopped him. "You can't run, Danny," she said. "If you disappear, they'll make you the villain. You started this. You need to finish it." He stared at her for a long moment. She was right. If he vanished, they'd twist the story. The only way to protect the truth was to face it. That night, Rivera called the journalist again. "They know it was me," he said. "But I'm not hiding anymore. If you really want to fix this, meet me tomorrow morning. Bring your camera. I'm ready to tell everything." The next day, he stood in front of City Hall, surrounded by flashing lights and microphones. He didn't wear his uniform. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. "I worked inside Rikers Island," Rivera said, "and what I saw, no human being should ever live through that. Inmates beaten, starved, and forgotten. We all knew. And we all stayed silent. But not anymore." The crowd erupted with cheers, but even in that moment he saw figures in the distance, men in dark suits watching him closely. He knew they weren't journalists. As reporters shouted questions, Rivera took a step back. "There's more," he said. "There's something big that no one has seen yet. The files they tried to destroy last week, they prove everything. But if I don't make it to the next press conference..." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes darting toward a man pushing through the crowd. "Danny, what's wrong?" the journalist whispered. Rivera's face went pale. "They found me," he said quietly. The man moved closer, reaching into his coat. The crowd screamed. And then, everything went black. Then came the final clip, one that would make the world stop and stare. Sirens wailed across downtown Manhattan. People scattered as police cars flooded the scene. The cameras that had been focused on Rivera's press statement now caught chaos. Officers shouting, reporters ducking, and the sound of a single gunshot echoing through the air. When the smoke cleared, Daniel Rivera lay on the ground, clutching his side. Blood stained his white shirt. Paramedics rushed in, and within minutes, he was in an ambulance speeding toward Bellevue Hospital. The journalist, shaking but determined, clutched the folder Rivera had dropped. Inside were printed pages, documents stamped confidential, Rikers Island internal review. She didn't know it yet, but what she held was enough to shake the entire city government. The next morning, news broke. Whistleblower officer shot after exposing Rikers Island scandal. The footage spread everywhere. America was watching. Inside Rikers, word traveled faster than light. Inmates cheered when they heard Rivera was still alive. "That man's a hero," one yelled through the bars. Guards said nothing, their faces tight with fear. Everyone knew this was the breaking point. The journalist, still shaken, went live on air later that night. Her voice trembled but stayed firm. "Daniel Rivera risked his life to show us the truth," she said. "And now we have proof that the abuse at Rikers was not random, it was protected by people in power." She held up one of the papers for the camera. The words were clear: use of force incidents, alteration and concealment procedures. That single document set off an earthquake inside City Hall. Investigations spread across multiple departments. Several top corrections officials resigned within days. Federal agents were called in to review the files. The mayor, under heavy pressure, announced a massive reform plan and promised that Rikers Island would finally be shut down within the next few years. But change wasn't easy. Protests continued. Families of inmates demanded justice for their loved ones who never made it out. Former prisoners shared painful stories on television, stories of nights without sleep, fights for survival, and the hopelessness of being forgotten. Meanwhile, Rivera recovered slowly in the hospital, under police protection. One evening, the journalist visited him. He looked weak but calm, a bandage wrapped around his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "The world knows now." He managed a faint smile. "No," he whispered. "We started it. The real fight is making sure this never happens again." Outside his room, cameras flashed through the glass as people gathered to show support. For once, a corrections officer and inmates were on the same side, both victims of a system that had been broken for too long. Months passed. Investigations turned into arrests. Several officers and high-ranking officials were charged with corruption, abuse, and cover-ups. A new independent oversight board was formed to monitor jail conditions. Construction began on smaller, safer borough-based facilities to replace Rikers. For many, it was a victory. But for those who had lived through the nightmare, it was bittersweet. The scars, both physical and emotional, would never fade completely. 1 year later, Rivera stood on a hill overlooking the East River, staring at the island that had once held so many secrets. The city was already tearing down old buildings there, replacing them with cranes and bulldozers. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. The journalist joined him, a camera slung over her shoulder. "They're finally shutting it down," she said. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Rivera nodded slowly. "It does. But I keep thinking about all the people who didn't make it out. Jamal. The kids. The ones who didn't have a voice. This place made headlines for its scandals, but maybe now it'll stand for change." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you ever regret it? Blowing the whistle?" He shook his head. "No. If telling the truth cost me my job, my peace, even my safety, it was still worth it. Because sometimes, the only way to fix something broken is to expose it to the light." The wind blew softly, carrying faint sounds from the construction site below. Rivera took one last look at the island, then turned away. For him, the fight was over, but for the city, the lesson would never be forgotten. Rikers Island had been a symbol of pain, corruption, and fear for decades. But now, because of one man's courage and the power of truth, it became something else entirely, proof that even the darkest places can be reformed when people refuse to stay silent. As Rivera walked away into the fading light, the last piece of the island crumbled behind him, swallowed by dust and time. And with it, the final chapter of one of America's most notorious jails came to an end.